problems as well. Things are falling apart, and I think this war in Ukraine is a welcome distraction for many of the leaders in the West, and that includes Germany, France, the UK, and of course the United States. So, what country do you want to focus in on as we examine the collapse of the collective West system?
Well, indeed. Well, let's before we do that, just have a general roundup, and let's start with the G20 Finance Ministers Summit, which took place in Washington, because of course where Collective West wanted to exclude Russia from the meeting, the chair of that meeting, which is Indonesia, refused. So the Russian Finance Minister Siluanov participated. That meant that the Western finance ministers refused to interconnect with him. And in effect, they held within the G20 a separate sort of G7 meeting. And over the course of it, they published, I thought, one of the most bizarre statements I've ever seen, which is that, they've waged this sanctions war against Russia. They invited the whole world to join. And they said that the sanctions that they're imposing on Russia are carefully calibrated so as not to do the most damage to Russia and the most minimal damage to the world economy. I mean, it's one of the most bizarre and extraordinary statements I've ever seen, because, of course, that is simply not true. And the background to this is that, as you absolutely rightly say, the war in Ukraine has been, to some extent, a distraction from political problems at home. But it is in the end going to intensify all of these political problems. So we now got a further horrifying inflation readout. This one was from Germany. Producer prices in Germany increased by 30%. That's 30% in March. That is the highest increase in inflation, in underlying inflation, that Germany has experienced ever since the foundation of the Federal Republic of Germany in the 1940s. So we're seeing an inflation crisis take hold everywhere. And what we're seeing in every single country, all of the big European countries and in the United States, is that the major political leaders are coming under enormous pressure. But of course, nobody wants to say what the various causes are. So we see in Britain, there are now concerted moves to force Boris Johnson again out of office. This is being used, what they're using again is Partygate. You remember that bizarre story about him holding parties in the garden of 10 Downing Street, and nobody, I think, really believes that this is really what is now undermining his position at the moment. But he's tried to block an investigation on this. Conservative MPs rebelled. He now has had to agree a further investigation. And there's widespread reports and rumours that his political support within the Conservative Party is collapsing. Except, of course, that the Conservatives have no alternative to put in his place, because Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, has been essentially neutered. I mean, he himself is in serious political trouble. In Germany, we are hearing now that there are concerted moves to bring down Olaf Scholz. Olaf Scholz is now paying the price of his weakness. He agreed to all the sanctions. He agreed to sanctions on the Russian central bank. He's agreed to give up coal. He's antagonized German industry. He's antagonized the German trade unions. And what he's discovered is, when you appease people who demand always endless escalation, is that he hasn't satisfied them either. So they're now saying that he's too weak. He's not sending enough weapons to Ukraine. And there's moves now by all the major parties, including people within the SPD, to remove him and perhaps to recreate his government, with the CDU now making a major pitch to try to push him aside. So we'll see what happens, and whether that happens, what happens in Germany. I'm not going to discuss France, because obviously there's a lot going on there. But all I will say is, again, you saw Macron having his debate with Le Pen, And it was obvious to me how much pressure he is under. And France is the most insulated of all the Western economies against this kind of crisis because, as a result of the fact that they invested heavily in nuclear power, inflation rates there are lower than they are in other places. And then in the United States, and I can't help but think that this is not a coincidence. You're seeing not just growing swing against the Democrats in the midterms, with Elizabeth Warren starting to openly criticize Nancy Pelosi and hints about the president not being really up for it. But on top of all of that, we're seeing all these investigations. We're seeing Durham's investigation is still trundling on, and he's producing more and more court filings in the Sussman case, which is now coming up, and they seem to very deeply implicate the entire Hillary Clinton campaign in fabricating every single part of Russiagate. Well, it's what we've always said, but now it's been looking as if that's coming together in a string of legal cases. And bear in mind, if the Republicans do win the midterms in November, as everybody expects, they're in a position to run with that. And whatever the plan about Laptopgate was, all those investigations there, whether it really was, as Robert Barnes thinks, and that's, as we discussed in that live stream, simply an attempt to keep that alive in order to keep the pressure on Biden to prevent him pulling back on Ukraine, which I think is highly likely. It's clear that is now, I think, slipping out of the deep state's control, because it turns out the Republicans have now obtained the laptop, or at least a complete copy of it, and they're pushing their investigations as well. So you see all the leaders of all the big states in the European Union in trouble, and in the United States as well.
Right. So, an outright Russian win in Ukraine in this conflict, I think, will mean the end of many of these governments, because they've gone all in to ensure a Ukraine win. In other words, they're betting their entire country, their entire political future. They've put everything on the line
Yes,
for Ukraine
yes,
to defeat
yes,
Russia in
yes.
this war. And so I would say, if the Russians do manage to, and it looks like they're doing it
Yeah.
pretty decisively, if they do manage to beat Ukraine in this conflict, then I imagine Germany, France, well, not France, Germany, Biden, Boris, they could be in very, very deep trouble if they're not already ushered out before we get some sort of resolution to this conflict.
I agree, and I would even include France. Now, let's put aside Macron and all that. The point is, France has an extremely unpopular political class, which, whatever happens, will try and retain control. And the French political class is perhaps the most unpopular of all the political classes in all of the states that we've been discussing. Expect major unrest in France over the next few months and years. I mean, the Gilets jaunes that we were hearing so much about is going to look like a mild picnic by comparison with what I suspect is coming. So France too, all of them, as you said, they bet the shop on Ukraine. Very strange thing to do, I have to say. A very, very weird thing to do. And they're running out of time, and they're getting more desperate. And of course, whatever leaders come and go, I mean, if Scholz is removed, the high probability is that the political class in Germany will substitute an even more hardline figure than Scholz. I mean, much more hardline figure. He'll start shipping weapons to Ukraine. He'll start doing all kinds of other things, cutting off oil, cutting off gas, doing all those sort of things, which will, of course, ultimately deepen the problems even more. So I think we're going to see a major crisis in Europe, probably a lesser crisis in the United States, because the United States is to some extent protected by all of this. It's become increasingly clear that the United States is becoming the oil supplier of last resort to the Europeans, because Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all of these places, Algeria has come out and said, we don't have enough gas to increase production. We can't increase production in the way that Mario Draghi, the Italian leader, hoped they would. So they've said they're not going to increase gas supplies by any significant level to Europe. So the United States is becoming the supplier of last resort in terms of oil and gas to Europe. The problem with doing that is that, of course, what they're having to do, even though they gained energy self-sufficiency under Donald Trump's administration, that is still a very precarious degree of energy self-sufficiency. Most people feel that over a fairly short time span, the United States is going to see that eroded. And of course, the actions that the Biden administration has done is going to intensify that even further. So oil is now being shipped by the United States to Europe. That oil is coming, a lot of it, directly out of the US's strategic reserve. The strategic reserve is being drained away. If liquefied natural gas is being sent to Europe, to the extent that Europe can even absorb it, that means less gas in the United States. Other suppliers are not coming forward. So even the United States is being affected as well by all of this. But unless there's a radical, fundamental shift by the political class, it looks to me as if we're heading for a very, very big crash. And I'm not somebody who follows finance things very well or understands them very well, but I'm getting the sense that people in the financial community are beginning to get worried too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you're going to get people who are more hardliners with regards to this conflict into Russia. I agree, in Germany and possibly even the United States and probably the UK as well. So they're going to take a more hardline approach. But what do you think is going to be the EU is sinking? I think that's crystal clear that the EU is sinking. Yeah. What do you think is going to be the I'm trying to think of the right words. I want to say the knockout blow that's going to be delivered by Russia and China. But I know when I say that, as I'm saying that, people are going to probably flip out in the comments. But what do you think is going to be the one thing that Russia does in retaliation? Because it hasn't really done anything. It hasn't really put any real set outside of the gas for rubles, which is not even that tough of a retaliation. If you even want to call it a retaliation, hasn't really done anything yet. What do you think Russia is going to do in order to just take out the EU economy? And
it's a good question because so far.
What do you? I mean, yeah.
The knockout blow. Well, first of all, I think that at the moment the Russians' focus is on the military events, and I think that they're, pressing on with their military campaign in eastern Ukraine. And that's something which we'll discuss in another program, no doubt. But at the moment, I think that's their priority, and I don't think they want to do anything that will disrupt their own recalibration of their economy, which, as you discussed in a recent program, as we do also discuss in a recent program, is going to take them a couple of months to do. But I think that one thing that is going to happen is that from the autumn, we're going to start to see natural gas flows to Europe start to fall, and they're going to start to fall radically. Now, Robert Habeck, the German economics minister, says that Germany is going to reduce its imports of natural gas from Russia by the end of this year by something like 2/3. He didn't explain how that's going to happen because Germany can't get liquefied natural gas. It's not getting it from anywhere, and there's no other pipeline gas coming from anywhere else. So how is he going to do it? Well, the short answer is he's buying at the moment as much Russian gas as he can to pile up the reserves, the underground reserves in Germany. So he's hoping that will be enough to get Germany and Europe at least through the winter. But it may not be. And realistically, if Germany is reduced to doing what the United States is currently doing with oil, which is depending on reserves And remember, natural gas reserves, you run through them very fast. Um, well, come midwinter, come late winter, you're going to see gas prices spiral even further. I mean, to almost unimaginable figures in Germany and in Europe at the start of 2023. And I have to say, at that point, I think it will be curtains.
I would
I
imagine
mean,
that
the
if the
the entire
yeah,
gamble, as you said in another program, is that they're hoping that they can break the Russians by the autumn. Because if they
by autumn,
don't,
yeah.
by autumn, if they don't, as I said, by midwinter, early spring next year, they will be in catastrophic trouble.
It doesn't look like they will. I mean, I'm looking at the
No,
ruble. It's at like 74, 75, 76, depending on the day that you look at it. Um, from what I understand, the even though Nabulina takes a very conservative approach in her messaging as the central bank head, um, it looks like Russia is going through some difficult economic times, but nothing that's
yeah,
existential, nothing
no,
that's going
exactly.
to lead to bankruptcy. Actually, I think I read an article just the other day which said, actually from the central bank, which said Russia
Yeah, yeah,
is not going to go bankrupt. Period. And to come from the
period.
central bank, which is very,
Yeah,
very conservative, I think
yeah,
that says a lot. So if they're betting on an autumn crash coming to Russia, I think they're going to be in big, big trouble because if Russia is waiting until the autumn to really retaliate against the European Union, I imagine a very simple strategy Russia can do is to not even target the entire European Union, just focus on Germany.
absolutely.
If you cause enough trouble and enough chaos in the German economy, all of Europe falls apart.
Implodes. Exactly. That is exactly what they're going to do. I mean, that is exactly what they do. And when you say all of Europe, can I just say Britain is connected because we are still very much part of the European energy complex, the gas and energy complex in Britain. So it will all fall apart. Britain, Germany, all of Europe, all of them, every one of them will be in horrific trouble. And of course, what they do, I really don't know because, at some point in the late summer, I suspect the penny's going to drop, as we say in Britain. They're going to understand that they've gambled. They put all their counters, playing roulette. You put all your counters on one on one number, and the wheel isn't spinning as they expected. What they're going to do at that point, I really don't know. And I mean, we've had all these mumbles and rumors about sending more and more arms to Ukraine and things of that kind. They've been shoveling weapons to Ukraine, and it hasn't been working. They've been throwing sanctions at Russia, and that hasn't been working too. They've been trying to rally the world against Russia, and the only part of the world they've rallied is themselves. So what do they do at that point? I'm afraid because they're so heavily invested, because they bet the shop on it, because they bet the whole house on it, the risk is that they will do something really, really reckless. I don't want to even
Go into
try to guess what it is. But the most likely thing
go,
I would have thought is to send troops into Ukraine. I mean,
yeah,
it's the only thing they can realistically do.
yeah. And that'll be, I mean, couple troops entering Ukraine, which will get annihilated by the Russians. Couple
Yes.
that with a Russian retaliation on an economic level, on a sanction
Yeah.
level against Germany, if they
Yeah.
do that.
Germany.
So I can imagine
Yeah.
Polish troops entering the west of Ukraine, and then I can imagine Russia at the same time, or very close to that time period, really hitting back at Germany with regards to various energy policies, or I
Yes.
guess you would call them sanctions on the Russian part towards Germany, and it would be just devastating for all of Europe. I mean, that would, and to be honest, I think Russia is also trying to take the nuclear option off the table, a nuclear retaliation from the West off the table by launching the Samtar ICBM, saying, you know what, if you guys even think that there's a nuclear solution to this crisis, well, you better think twice because if you do go that route, well, we can strike, from a distance of up to 20,000 kilometers. I mean,
Well, that's
this
exactly what they
ICBM
did.
thing looks absolutely terrifying.
Well, that's exactly what it was meant to be. Can I just say, if you think that that test was just a coincidence, that this is just, development program, and that, that they only staged it now. The reason they staged it is because, of course, the Western media and some Western governments have been full of stories about Russia using nuclear weapons in the war in Ukraine, something that the Russians have always said is ridiculous and nonsense, and which they have no intention of doing. More to the point, Russian officials, I've seen this, have actually said that the West is mirror imaging, that it's the West that has been thinking about nuclear weapons. So, of course, the Sarmat test was intended to remind everybody that if you want to go down this particular route, well, we're in a position to do overwhelming damage to you. By the way, since we're talking about geostrategic things, global things, I was reading in the Chinese media, there has been an incredible, ferocious article, which is an opinion piece, but it's clearly an opinion piece, which has been authorized by the Chinese government, which has been massively critical of Europe. Up to now, the Chinese line has been that it's the United States is bullying Europe to get Europe to do all the things that it has done. Well, this article changes, this opinion piece, I want to stress it's an opinion piece, changes that entirely. It says that the Europeans themselves seem to be enthusiastic in doing all of these things to themselves. There's no prospect of them changing policy, and they are beyond redemption. I mean, I've never seen the Chinese media talk like that about Europe. So you can see the Chinese have been trying to talk to the Europeans over the last couple of weeks. They found the Europeans blind, deaf to all discussion, and they're now themselves losing patience with the Europeans too.
All right, let's just leave it there. I guess, like I said, I think that come autumn, the EU is going to be in for a very rude awakening. Very rude
I think
awakening.
so. I think so. Can I just also quickly add one other thing that's happening is that Christine Lagarde at the central bank, the European Central Bank, what is she doing? Is she raising interest rates? No. She's keeping them in negative territory. She's still pursuing QE, and she said that she's going to go on doing it because, of course, she's got to do that in order to help her friends in Paris and Rome and wherever and Madrid to hold things together. So it's, which is going to create inflation crisis, make the inflation crisis even deeper, and is going to exacerbate the economic divisions within the Eurozone.
Yeah, their final bet right before the collapse is going to be to send Polish troops in.
Yeah,
And I hope
exactly.
I'm wrong there.
I hope I'm wrong too.
They're going to put their bet on Poland, and Poland's going to oblige to it. And
Yeah,
it's just going to be a smash. And I think the Russians are. I think they're waiting for it. If you want my opinion,
absolutely.
I think the Russians are expecting it and they're waiting for it.
I agree with that too. Yes,
Yeah. And that ICBM, by the way, is hypersonic, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Is that
absolutely. It
correct?
is
Or it
absolutely.
can
It's
be. It
absolutely.
can be.
It can't be intercepted, and it's capable of launching hypersonic warheads. There's nothing you can do about it, and it can strike. It can go right round the South Pole, so that it can strike the United States from the north, from the south, and of course all the US's air defense systems are located expecting an attack from the north. So it's an absolutely overwhelmingly powerful weapon.
All right. The Duran.locals.com, everybody. And if you're watching us from Rumble, you'll find a button which will take you straight to our locals page, a red and maroon button, which will take you to our locals community, the Duran shop. 10% off when you use the code Good Day. Take care.